Welcome to the Deep Blue on My Doorstep podcast. I'm Tracy Ainsworth from the University of New South Wales. In this podcast series, we will talk to marine experts about the marine environments that we have right on our doorsteps and what we can do to help conserve and protect these blue spaces. Iain Suthers, Professor in Biological, Earth and Environmental Sciences at the University of New South Wales. You work at the Sydney Institute for Marine Science, which is where you're talking to us from today. Welcome, Iain, and thank you so much for joining us and for finishing off our series, Deep Blue on My Doorstep podcast. We're going to be talking to you a lot about the big picture for our blue spaces, what ties everything together, what the future holds. But we're also going to be talking about your career on the East Australia Current and I guess celebrating this ocean current because it's what ties us all together, ties us to the blue spaces that we have.
It does. It is the great unifier of all Australians and New Zealanders is the EAC.
There you go. Really brings us together even with New Zealanders. Today we also have Nathan with us, who's our podcast expert, tech guy, audio, who's sat through all of these podcasts with us and is going to jump in and say hi every now and then.
Yeah, it's been great to be here. Don't forget the Tasmanians as well.
We can forget the Tasmanians, can't we, Iain?
That's right. Well, it does you link us, then the EAC, Australia, with Tasmania and New Zealand, and of course the Southern Ocean. But it is a remarkable river of warm water that unites us all, and even links us up with. I think one of the politicians got under this that when they spoke about microplastics and so on, that we're all just one, aren't we? And in part, they're right, of course, because we all share molecules of water with ourselves, our bodies, and the ocean. But we really do have something that is certainly for a number of years, the East Australian current that flows by us is really Australian. And the plankton is Australian, the fish are Australian, it's warming and ocean acidification is very Australian. So we can claim it for a while. It is ours. And it's something that we need to treasure. I'm sitting here sipping some water and, about 50%, certainly during the drought, at the very least, 50% of our water, you can thank the East Australian current. We can thank it for those East Coast lows and those storms that you can thank when you eat your tuna fish sandwich. If it's been harvested as skipjack from the East Coast of Australia, you can thank the East Australian current.
That's awesome. So it is definitely part of our national identity and not just because of really cool scenes in Finding Nemo. Brings us all together. Yeah. So you think this is a current that should be celebrated?
Oh, we should definitely celebrate it. I think it's because, and it's underrated. Australians are very much a terrestrial nation. We are, the man from Snowy River, it's Mulga Bill's bicycle and Banjo Patterson are very terrestrial sort of icons of Australian and Australian culture. And it was really ironically Pixar and Finding Nemo that brought to us that the reality that this is very much part of Australia as well. And I really see that in my lifetime, and I'm getting on a little bit, is that we will have many, many more Australians engaged with the ocean, with the continental shelf, for jobs, for food, for security, much more than we've ever done before.
Yeah. Well, deep water fishing off the coast, surfing, all these things we love to go do. We love to go to the beach when the water's nice and warm. That's all thanks to the EAC. In this series, we've talked about seabirds, sharks, turtles. Again, these are all the things that we love, but they need the EAC as well.
Yeah, it's funny. Many people now that they know that I dabble in the East Australian current, they curse me for during their January Christmas holidays. They want to go for a swim in the nice warm ocean water, and it is bitterly cold in January, in the middle of summer.
Nice.
And they say it's your rotten East Australian current that's driven cold upwelling and made the water bitterly cold and creating habitats for great white shark. And I say, yep. They're welcome to the East Australian current.
Yep. So for anyone out there, when you're out on the beach and it's too cold in January, you're going to have to think of Professor Iain Suthers from UNSW.
Just the EAC.
Iain, you've been working along our coast for quite a long time. Your PhD took you to Canada. You worked in Norway. You came back home, back to Australia. Was it the draw of the current as well as being back home that brought you back and kept you here?
Yeah, good question. Because I say, you get a few grey hairs, you do reflect on those very exciting times when you're a young university student and you're meeting cool people and you're suddenly broken out of that high school sort of constraint and suddenly finding out who you are as a person and with all, some features maybe not what you would like of yourself. But anyway, you find people that welcome you. And then you go away because for a whole bunch of reasons, you need to move away, especially in the world of science. Doesn't matter what science you're in or even arts or anything else. You need to move to broaden your horizons and your way of thinking. So as you say, I went to Canada and then I knew I needed to go to Norway because that was where fisheries science began. And it's always cool to go back to where fisheries culture is so strong. But it was the lure of the gum leaf. It was Australia that I wanted to come back to. I'd hear an Australian accent, and even though by then, after nearly 10 years, I had a very Canadian accent. And it still comes out occasionally when I get nervous. But I really missed Australia. My parents were getting a little bit older. I had young nieces that were getting older and growing up, and they never knew their Uncle Iain. Yeah. So I knew it was time to come back. My mum did a little trick. She sent, letters. I used to write letters in those days, and wrapped inside was a little gum leaf. And she said, put this gum leaf in a little ashtray and put a match to it. And so you smelt the smoke coming off a smoldering gum leaf. And immediately the tears start to fill up because all those memories. So that's what I came home. But in doing so, I also dragged with me a Canadian wife who loved snow and ice and maple leaves and maple sugar. So I have always respected the fact that she gave up that love of her country to come to Australia with me and enjoy, this crazy life of chasing the East Australian current.
Nice. That was quite a good trick your mum played, I have to say. I'm going to remember that when my kids are older. They already talk about going and living off overseas. So I'm going to pull that out when they don't come back home.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a part because, Cub Scouts or even just, and of course, last summer, who can forget that we had so much smoke all over Sydney, and it wasn't perhaps such a nice experience, but you got that smell of smouldering eucalyptus. Normally, it's a pleasant experience of being around a fire and trying to keep warm. So yeah, it's a very powerful memory that goes right back into your brain immediately.
Yeah. You mentioned before you've been doing lots of research into the East Australia current and understanding what's happening out in our ocean along our entire coastline. One of the things in your research is that you've shown the EAC is accelerating.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah. Sometimes we like to use the word strengthening, but accelerating is perfectly good. It means it's changing its velocity. So it's funny. This was predicted back in the 70s, quite remarkably, because they realized that the winds in the Southern Ocean were increasing because the planet was starting to warm because of greenhouse gases. And the winds go from west to east in the Southern Hemisphere, and they push the bottom of this huge South Pacific gyre, which is a massive, body of water between South America and Australia and topped by the equator. And it goes in a big sort of anti-clockwise direction. And so the East Australian current is simply, the western side, the left-hand side of this great gyre, South Pacific gyre. You can imagine, therefore, those winds that they predicted in the Southern Ocean spinning up that gyre, forcing that Southern Ocean, pushing it and pushing it and pushing it, or stroking it, They're getting to spin up. And so it drives up the currents along the west coast of South America, the Humboldt currents, and then it comes up to off the top of South America and then drives the South Equatorial current right across the equator. And it takes nearly 2 years to make that journey across the equator. And it reaches New Caledonia and comes in between those islands and splits. A little one goes up along the Great Barrier Reef. It's called the Hiri current, Hiri. And not many people know that. I didn't know it for a while. And then the rest of it then obviously turns left and forms to form the East Australian Current, and it fills up the southern Coral Sea with this warm and not so salty water, but it's warm, it's buoyant, and then it begins to flow out of the bottom there, almost like the bottom of a funnel, to flow down really strongly past Brisbane. Along, when I say past Brisbane, it's actually out on the edge of the continental shelf, about 40 kilometres offshore, and there's this strong jet of warm water that flows down along northern New South Wales, reaches central New South Wales, and I'm sorry to answer your question, that flow is strengthening because of those winds in the Southern Ocean that they predicted, they forecast, expected, nearly 50 years ago. And now we're seeing it. It's speeding up faster, and the signature, the temperature and salt characterizes the Southern Coral Sea is now we're seeing it. It's being manifest in the waters of Sydney and off Eden, and of course off Hobart.
That's amazing. What does it mean for how much we rely on the EAC and how much these different ecosystems along the coast, are they affected by this strengthening?
Yes, well, the main outcome is the fact that warmer water is now coming down because the planet is warming and the oceans are absorbing that extra heat and carbon dioxide. That because of that, there's warmer water. Now it appears off Sydney, there's warm water off Eden, and it's roughly, maybe it's, recent figures haven't been updated, but it's roughly shifted. The temperatures that would be typically received off Sydney have now been shunted 400 kilometres south to off Eden. And the temperatures and waters that are off Eden are now being shunted down to occur off Hobart. So we're talking at the moment, only degree temperatures of 1 or 2 degrees, which is actually a lot in the world of oceanography and water. But some of us sitting in the armchair back home saying, well, if my cup of tea is 1 or 2 degrees warmer, you hardly notice it, right?
Yeah.
What's the effect of this strengthening East Australian current? And I mentioned the rising temperature, that it really affects, say, a fish or a lobster by an increase in its temperature by 10 or 20%. So imagine if you or I had an increase in temperature of 10 or 20%, then in percentage terms, that becomes scary for our physiology.
Yeah, that's quite substantial.
It also enables different animals now to move further south and not just be transported, but now be able to breed, reproduce, and have a self-sustaining population. And I'm sure some of your other speakers may have spoken about how sea urchins that occurred off Sydney, but they didn't have, it wasn't never warm enough. The critical temperature was 12 degrees Celsius off Hobart, but that threshold was passed about 10 years ago or more. And now the urchins that could only occur off Sydney and maybe as far south as Eden can now occur off Hobart. And there they found beautiful, tall, luxuriant kelp forests that we could only dream of. And those urchins got stuck into that, which is one of the saddest, the strongest economic examples that we've got so far of the impact of this strengthening East Australian current is for the island of Tasmania. It was so dependent upon lobster and abalone and kelp forests. That's now gone, or it's vastly impacted hugely. It's a $200 million a year industry, and it's now only a fraction of that, which for a small island economy has huge ramifications.
Yeah, that's quite incredible, because that's what people in Tassie are seeing right in front of them. Those kelp forests are really close to the shorelines, and like you said, these massive kelp forests gone in a matter of a decade. But we've known, you said, for 50 years that this was something that was going to happen. Australia also has this incredible, the Great Southern Reef, so this temperate region of massive diversity and a unique place in the planet. And it's something I think we've probably only recently started to appreciate, but at the same time, we're just starting to appreciate what it is. It's being impacted and it's changing.
Yeah. The Great Southern Reef is something that many Australians haven't heard of, and I guess some of your other speakers may have mentioned it. But for me, it really that paper came out in 2015 to point out how productive kelp forests were, their value that they give to the small rural economies of the coastal economies all around southern Australia, right from northern New South Wales down to Tasmania, across the Great Australian Bight to Western Australia. It's something like $10 billion a year is valued for all the fishing and ecotourism that we get benefit from that. And now that is fundamentally changing. There's some other interesting things that has come from a strengthening East Australian current. It's not just all, it's changed. Whether it's bad news, I can't say.
Yeah.
But, the Tasmanians, if you speak to any of the people in their fishing boats, they love it because there's now yellowtail kingfish, this magnificent, gorgeous, tasty fish that is now in their waters.
Yeah.
I call it the yellowtail kingy is equivalent to fish chocolate. It's a magnificent fish. It eats like a pig. It grows like a weed. You couldn't believe it. It's such a fast fighting fish.
Yeah.
It's a lovely animal, and it's now in Tasmanian waters, and they are this fishing community are enjoying it. And pink snapper, that beautiful Apagris auratus, that lovely pink sapphire speckled fish, is now appearing in big numbers, surprising people, and again they are harvesting it. So we're looking at changed ecosystems.
Yeah.
So the kelp forests are often gone. The sea urchins have arrived. The snapper eat some of the sea urchins if they can get them. And here we are, sort of, this changing dynamic, trying to keep the abalone and lobster fishing going, because you've got seals there. It's just, it's this mix, and everything is such dynamic change that for us as scientists to say, well, this led to this, which is causing this, and in 10 years' time, it's really hard because nothing has settled down yet. It's all bouncing around. You've got, let alone seasons, but then you've got the ecosystems are resonating and changing.
Yeah. Do we know how long this strengthening is going to continue for?
It will continue to build and strengthen for the decades to come until we finally wean ourselves off burning fossil fuels. Yeah. And even just burning natural gas, which thought was tamer and better, but you read about how much methane is released to the atmosphere when you tap into natural gas. And methane is 83 times more powerful than carbon dioxide to retaining the sun's heat. I was staggered to learn that. And some of these natural gas wells, because they got leaks and because gas is, when you're pulling out of the ground, it's kind of cheap, it's just spewing out this unburnt methane into the atmosphere. We need to definitely find alternative methods of getting power. And we are, it's really exciting, some of the changes that are happening now, the technologies. We're really on the cusp of so much danger and risk, but also the cusp of so much exciting and good. And we just need to push it more towards the exciting and good side of the equation.
That's a great message for the young listeners out there, that it is an era of a lot of change and things happening in our blue spaces that we don't necessarily want to happen. But with that comes that, you said, that opportunity to do better. You do a lot of research on plankton as well. You talk a lot about fish, but plankton is kind of captured your heart, hasn't it?
It has.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's 33 animal phyla on planet. That is, big animal kingdoms, big classifications, chunks of life. 33 of these big, and there's 32 of them are found in plankton. It's really diverse. It's beautiful. And it's all mostly all microscopic, not totally. You got jellyfish and krill and so on, but really it's just amazing diversity. And so when you dive into that beautiful crystal clear water, you have all this plankton that's stuck in your hair, little tiny bits of it, occasionally stuck in your hair or your swimsuit, and there's in that plankton. Remember, there's also about a million bacteria per milliliter of seawater, 500,000 to 1 million. You're the microbiologist, but this is only kind of revealed in the last 20 years. Realized such diversity of bacteria, let alone all the copepods and all the diatoms and the plants and the animals, single-celled plants that and the plankton. And I guess to really get your listeners' attention, every second breath you take, you can thank the oceans, these ecosystem services that we get for free. And imagine if you had to pay for every lungful of air. What would you pay? $1?
A lot less than that.
I know.
I don't know, COVID situation.
I'd want a free trial.
Yeah, I mean, I like my lungfuls of air, and every second one, I tend to really thank the environment, and it usually from the ocean. All that phytoplankton, the algae, the single-celled plants of the ocean, are taking in our carbon dioxide and using photosynthesis and releasing oxygen. And in doing so, these nice little tasty plant morsels that then little tiny copepods, which are tiny little crustaceans, small little shrimps, they eat that up and they convert that into protein. And then these little small bait fish that I find also fascinating, like sardines and what we call yellowtail scad or yakka, they scoop up the zooplankton. And then nice big tuna and those yellowtail kingfish, they come and eat those sardines and yakka, and ends up on the table occasionally. So the cycle of life is really there in the plankton. So plankton just I find remarkable, and it's such an ecosystem that is not structured by trees and rocks and soil, but it's just in this sort of clear medium of water, and at fantastic volumes. 70% of the surface is habitat for plankton. So, and they've had, hundreds of millions of years to evolve and adapt and cope. And it's part of our resource and really part of our future, that if we don't really understand the plankton, then we can't really manage our own growth in population and how we deal with the environment at sea or even on land. The plankton is quite remarkable.
You've spoken about the East Australian current, coastlines, plankton, all the way from the water through to restaurant plate. What is it? When did you first feel that affinity to know so much about the ocean? Do you remember what inspired you to take this journey in your life? All these ocean voyages?
Yeah. I guess when I was a teenager, I was a bit of a fish head. Yeah. I just like to go fishing. I like to keep tanks of fish. Started off with goldfish.
Fish head, I think, is a technical term we use in science.
Yeah. Well, if you're a surfer, we call you a wax head. And if
exactly.
If you're into fish, then you're a fish head. And I was definitely a fish head. Just loved, because I could see personalities and expressions and traits and all these different species of fish. And even within amongst when I was a 10-year-old, these little goldfish that I kept. But then I graduated obviously to big tropical fish like Oscars and all their territoriality and their courtship, and you'd see a splash of water go out onto the floor in the living room, and then I stepped up into marine fish. And I think it was that point I was at this very influential point in my life was second year university, where people from, in those days, the CSIRO Marine Lab was based out at Cronulla here in southern Sydney. And there's a lady there, Pauline, who brought along a bucket of fresh zooplankton. And I still remember looking down the microscope and looking at her with open eyes, and my jaw kind of dropped. I had no idea. I really had no idea. And then I found these same little crustaceans, little copepods in my own marine fish tank. And my supervisor said, well, they're part of the whole ecology, ecosystem within your tank to keep it healthy.
Yeah.
And that's when I think the light started to come on. But then as I finished up that my third and fourth year, you're thinking, well, what next? And I credit my dad with this comment. I don't know if he actually said the exact words, but it's something to the effect of, well, this marine biology is all very well, but when are you going to get a real job?
Yes. I think every marine scientist has heard that.
Because I was young and naive, and I just shrugged and thought, well, she'll be right.
Yeah.
And away I went. And I bumped into the Canadian, and I knew that Canada was really big into fisheries research. The Canadian Journal of Fisheries and Aquatic Sciences is a great scientific journal that the Canadian government had supported. And so I knew going to Canada would be a smart move, and hey, I wanted to travel, so I got that. And I was working more on fish than I was on plankton, but I realized that the really interesting bits would be dealing with marine fish, and to do that is tough to get into. It's all the maths that's involved and forecasting and fishery science. It's very mathematical, and I wasn't strong at mathematics, to say the least. So, but plankton was a good niche, and I remembered that what Pauline had shown me back in my second year lab. So I went to Dalhousie on the east coast of Canada, and they had ships that were just devoted to understanding those drivers of their fishery, and that was through plankton. And it's in the plankton that I found these little baby larval fish. So those big, magnificent Atlantic cod, as big as I am, as adults, spew out millions of eggs in each spawning bout over Browns Bank, just off the coast of Halifax there. And then these little tiny larvae that hatch out at 2.8, 3 millimeters long, and then they grow and grow. They're about sort of 20 millimeters long by the end of the summer, and they reach sort of 20 centimeters long by the end of their first year. And if they can dodge the seals, then after 1 year, they now will grow and join the fishery. And what a fishery that was up until the late 1990, when the moratorium came and the collapse of the Canadian cod. I always feel guilty. My PhD, I must have caught about, 10,000 baby cod, which sounds like a huge number. Remember, these baby cod are dying at 10 or 20% per day, so through natural causes. So, and I was trying to understand those natural causes so we could forecast better, but I always felt a bit guilty about that.
All those ones that went into jars.
They did, and I'm still actually digging into those data sets even 30 years later. It's quite an interesting exercise, and of course my supervisor is my PhD supervisor has just retired himself, so we still keep in contact, and he's witnessed massive changes in the ecosystem off the east coast of Canada. For different reasons, we're seeing massive changes that are starting to appear off the east coast of Australia. And so it's sometimes with grey hair, it's interesting to actually see the changes that are happening and to understand if they're scary changes or they're just natural changes, and why. And what can we do about it if we want to do something about it?
Can we learn anything from what happened in Canada in that fishery? And are there lessons that we can apply as things are changing here, even with different causes?
Yeah, good question. The human condition is not good to listening to science, and the human condition is not good to looking at history either. We tend to repeat it. But yes, there are many lessons. How we manage a fishery cost effectively. You don't want to just burden it with all kinds of bureaucracy and science and rules and regulations. I get that. But there is definitely ways that we could do it better, and we'll have to. Yeah. In fact, I think it's quite exciting, Tracy, for some of the possibilities for the future. So the lessons from that were that that traditional methods couldn't keep up with the changing technology and the improving knowledge that those fishermen had, and so therefore a day spent at sea was far more effective in the 1990s than it was back in the 1960s. So now we're looking at this new environment. I mean, increasing demand for fish and to feed a growing planetary population. We need to really better manage the continental shelf. That is our new frontier. That's our new farmland, our new because remember that when the settlers first came to Australia, they came in with guns and sheep, and they chopped down trees and they grew paddocks and to put in pasture and all that kind of stuff. So in some ways, a little less dramatically, we need to put in kinds of infrastructure to be able to manage our fishery and to improve the survival of those little larval fish. So rather than losing 10 or 20% per day when they're first spawned by mum and dad fish, maybe that we'd only lose sort of 9 or 19% per day. And when you've got billions of eggs, that comes out as a big number for future fisheries. And so that's the sort of thing that we're looking at in how we can improve the natural production of fish. We can just nudge it, nurture it a little better. And so we can still have our, keep our fish and have it too.
Nice. You mentioned fishermen and their knowledge of what they're catching out in the ocean, and their involvement in the fishery. Is building those relationships between science, fishermen, and government, is it a challenge?
Wow, Tracy, you're asking these great questions. Yes, it's a huge challenge, and but it's such a lack, and it always has been a lack. And I squirm as a scientist that I haven't spent more time chatting to fishing communities, fishing captains, because they see it, and they're really smart, because they've got to deal with computers and satellite images and drive ships and navigate and deal with price and fluctuations and landings and rules and regulations. It's quite complicated, and they do it really well. I don't know how they can, sometimes a bit overwhelming. So to talk to them is really eye-opening. And I always relish the privilege it is when I get to chat to these guys, because I know I'm humbled. They know so much more than I do. But they give me the respect because I've written a PhD thesis on Atlantic cod. But so we do need to far better. I think that's one of the biggest problems we've got to, so we don't go down the path of that, east coast of Canada cod collapse, is to just chat more to the fishing communities, not just the person that drives the boat, but the guys on the deck and the person back in the fish co-op where they deal with the fish and how many their weights and the sizes, because they get to see, jeepers, these fish are coming in a bit smaller this time of year or compared to last year, or they've got a lot more spots and dots. They look a bit skinny, all that kind of stuff. Because they see fish all the time, they get to see stuff that you or I might just go, yeah, it's a fish, so what? So I think talking to them and seeing what they've got, and I say this, but I feel bad that I haven't done much about it, just because based in Sydney and I've got to prepare for tomorrow's lectures, and I really need to just spend more time asking about what they see.
You've got this incredible experience along the coast and in the water, and knowledge all the way from the ocean through to the fish. For people to get involved in what you do and learn more about your research and make those connections, how can they do that?
Yeah. So there are, these days, of course, there are much better ways with this multimedia. You can follow you and other people with on Twitter and on Facebook to learn what's actually happening, and when you can get to meet people when they have festivals and celebrations by the sea. But I think that's only start of it. You really need to get your credentials so that you can talk the talk, and to do that, you need to have the courage to, pack up your bags and go to any of the universities around the coast, just to learn about how to identify those plankton, what is important in terms of their DNA and their cells and the bacteria they interact with, and then how does that then translate into a fishery and the economics, and you got climate. When you've got that ground, it sounds like a lot, but over 3 years, and it's a hell of a ride, it's a great time. Then 3 years, then maybe you could even do an honors year, which helps you do a little bit of a research and teaching at the same time. It's a mix and match. It's kind of fun. And then you're in great shape to actually, you probably don't realize it, but you've got all, especially from your background you had as a kid with your parents. Now you bring that in with this bit of training you've had at university. Then you can go back to the society or to the boats or to Canberra to actually make the place a better place, make things work better, to improve the communication. We don't communicate very well as humans. We read Twitter podcasts and so on, but we don't actually communicate. And to do that, you often have to do it, personally, either by like a video link like this, or we actually, sit around a campfire on a field trip and talk about, plankton in Smith's Lake and the fish there that feed on that plankton and how they appear at 100 tons per year going through the co-op just down the street.
Iain, you have taught so many students about the ocean. You've taught postgraduate students how to study the ocean and entire ocean systems. You've published over 200 research articles about the ocean, all the way from the currents to the fish. What has been the most significant for you in that huge body of work?
Yeah, wow, scary question. It's been a journey. It still is a journey. And certainly having those students now who are your colleagues. It's funny, when I went for promotion a few years ago and I said, they said, well, how come you got all these students? You've supervised them. How do you do it? And I said, well, I don't really supervise these students because they're young, they're smart, they're motivated. And Steinberg, who was on the committee at the time, he butted in and said, I think Iain means that he's a mentor. So I mentor all these guys and they become your friends, your colleagues. And now they are in the US dealing with ways to stop boats running into leatherback turtles or seals. They're in Western Australia dealing with mullets and tailor fisheries, or they're releasing young prawns into estuaries on the south coast. And that is what gets me out of bed and gives me a buzz, is because I'm dealing with, or I have dealt with, all these really cool, motivated, clever people who are going on to such great careers and doing stuff that, well, I'd like to do what they're doing. It seems, because I'm just seeing all the the nice bits, the outcome, not all the hard work that went in to get them to all these places. But it's just great to see that, and that's, for me, if I got run over by a bus tomorrow, heaven forbid, I think I'd be really satisfied. I'd be really overwhelmed by what these students have achieved. I just sat here with Adriana Vergas just yesterday, and she was listening to the video presentations by, I think, 99 of the graduate students gave their 1 minute thesis competition. And she said it's just uplifting to see the research that all these students are doing, and it's so insightful. It's such depth. And it's just here within our little university. And this has been replicated at other universities around Australia, overseas. And just the pursuit of knowledge and to understand the world around us is just mind-blowing. It's just, and it is, I think science and its pursuit is really part of our culture, part of our life. Just the way we think of music and art is culture, but science is as well, and the pursuit of knowledge. And it seems this universe has plenty of problems left to resolve and to understand. I'm just writing now a little bit about the history of some of the early marine scientists who came to Australia 100 years ago, and seeing what their insight then and how I've built on that now. And can you just possibly conceive in 100 years' time what they'll do with either Tracy's or Iain's research to build on that again, as we go up to maybe 10 billion people on the planet, trying to conserve biodiversity, to still keep a healthy air and water and food supplies, and secure that. It's based upon good science and passionate people to make the place a better place.
I think that's fantastic, Iain. What I've really loved in our chat today is connectivity keeps coming through. How connected we are. We're connected by the EAC. We're connected with our neighbours in the Pacific. You talked about some of your work that's going to take knowledge from here and share it with other places. We're connected to people who do different things, fishermen, scientists, policymakers. We're all connected. In the current climate with COVID, we're looking closer to home than we have in a really long time. We're paying so much more attention to what we have here rather than than what's far away. One last message for our listeners about what does the future hold? What do you think is the really, exciting thing that's happening next that we need to be paying attention to right here?
Well, the really exciting thing probably by the end of this year will be a vaccine, and that's exciting. And I'm very confident of that coming up very soon. So I think we should be, we can't, we still got to wear our masks and socially distance, all that kind of stuff for the next 6 to 8 months, but it's really exciting. But from my marine perspective, which I know is where your question was, I know, the East Australian Current is I think a really exciting time because such as just this podcast itself, but also all the way through society to Canberra and to the politicians, they are investing in marine science. And so if you're a student that likes a bit of maths and a bit of science, really wants to make the world a better place, you look around, where are the companies and where are the governments investing? It's in marine science. So we have a big, brand new research vessel, the Investigator, 93 meters long. We have a system of observing the ocean now with oceanographic moorings, with satellites, with these autonomous gliders that go through the ocean. We can put little acoustic transmitters inside tuna and fish or cuttlefish, and that all gets assimilated into a central database so that we can look at a fish and say, the marine bacteria that was at that location when that fish moved through because the zooplankton was at this particular amount, because a satellite showed us that there was a frontal system of the East Australian Current, it starts to make sense. And what is really exciting is that despite, tough budgets and so on, we've got Antarctica. And the federal government has invested many hundreds of millions of dollars into a new icebreaker that gets delivered later this year it will arrive in Hobart, and it really is to consolidate Australia's investments in Antarctica, in that Southern Ocean, in the research. And they need people to populate it. And they need people who are just motivated, excited. And I think the opportunities today are far more than when I was a student. So I think that you should be optimistic about the opportunities. And also, we're going to become a maritime nation. We will need to deal with the continental shelf. We will either generate electricity from the East Australian Current. We're certainly going to be relying on our fish from the East Australian Current. There'll be aquaculture potential, huge systems that the Norwegians are already putting in place that we'll have to have just for the reality of feeding ourselves and the neighbors in the Pacific region and in the Southern Hemisphere. So I think I see within 10 years there'll be massive changes in the way we do business, the way we live lives. We'll have artificial intelligence is just around the corner, and it's going to be a complete upheaval to the job market, to your traditional job markets of driving taxis and trucks and buses. But those people who are in the area that need to be innovative and to think outside the box and to look at the challenging marine environment, because salt water is pretty unfriendly to electronics and to boats. But those are sort of the opportunities where young people have tremendous opportunities. And I find it actually very exciting. I'm really interested in the next 10 years more than I am about the last 10 years, really.
That's fantastic, Iain. That's such a lovely note to end the podcast and the series on, that for young people coming up through the ranks and finishing science at school or at uni, that there's just so much potential in front of them and so much positivity as well. So thank you so much for your work and your time today celebrating the blue spaces that we have. Thank you for listening to the Deep Blue On My Doorstep podcast. Don't forget to check out our website at events.unsw.edu.au, where you'll find all the photographs from this podcast series featuring the beautiful places that we've been discussing and the organisms found in these blue spaces.